Hi everyone, my name is James Feeney. Welcome to or back to my channel. Today we are here with another spread reading tutorial, and this is one that I shared on my Instagram. Whenever I do these sorts of tutorials, it's because I made the spread, used it for myself, and for the most part I will post it on Instagram first as just the raw spread so that somebody can see the positions, or anybody following can see the positions and try it. And then I like to eventually come on YouTube and do a tutorial for anybody who would actually want to perform this reading so they can see what I intended when I set out to make it and how I go about doing it for myself. So I thought it would be fun to share this one. I really enjoyed doing it, and I hope this will be a fun exercise. I enjoy doing little exercises, tarot and oracle related, that others post. So if this is of interest, stay tuned. I'm also going to give you guys a walkthrough of actually the reading that I did, with going through the actual writings that I had in regards to that reading, just because this one is, I was looking back at it and it's a pretty general reading. Like, the notes that I took weren't specific. I wasn't actually going into real life details about me. It was very general. It was almost written vaguely, metaphorically, as if it were a story, or I was just naming very broad characteristics. So I didn't think it was too personal. So I figure I'll share my actual findings after we go through the basic tutorial, if that's something you're interested in, seeing how I went about, say, recording the reading. So in the Instagram post, the original that I posted, I used the Elemental Tarot just because this reading is kind of a take on the sort of four elements reading, although it's different, which is the whole point. So this is the Elemental Tarot. I know that this is the older edition, but there is a reprinting coming. You can actually now pre-order on Amazon. I think Schiffer's doing a reprinting of this deck. If you're interested in the older edition, which has been out of print for a while, I got mine from the creator's website. So if you just Google the Elemental Tarot, I'm sure her website will come up. I'm not sure if she has any left. I remember having a talk with her and she said there weren't many, but it's worth a try, and you might be able to find one on eBay or Etsy or something, just in case you were curious about this deck. And so it is an 8-card spread, and this is the Assessing Our Aces spread. So really, an ace is a seed of a suit or an element, and so we want to divide that into 2 parts. So the whole idea is to say, look at the fire or the wand suit, really assess it as far as like fire goes. What does that mean? And we're breaking it into its dignified and ill-dignified or undignified aspect. And we're really wanting to see how that expresses through us. So when fire is at its most dignified, when we see that passion in life, that spirit, that excitement, what does it look like as personified by us when we experience that? Because that's going to be different for me and how I experience, say, the best side of fire, as opposed to how you experience fire when it's really in its prime. And how does it look when it is ill-dignified and not so pretty, when it's turned sour? That's going to also look different for everybody. And so this is really about self-assessment in a really elemental way. We're also looking at dualities here. We want to see the contrast. We want to see what is the difference and understand ourselves better. So hopefully we can try to focus on highlighting the strengths here and at least understanding, so that when we find ourselves in these ill-dignified states, we can understand it. We can hopefully mitigate that becoming something that's so damaging, or at least something that we remain in. We want to be able to recognize when we're in this state and find a way out of it. So we're going to get into that, and so I'll walk you through how I would interpret it. So this is a sample reading that we're doing right here in the beginning for the purposes of a tutorial. So like my other tutorials, we're not going to go so in depth into what the card might mean, this like as if it were an actual reading, just because this isn't intended for anybody. We're really just trying to focus on the spread position and interpreting and understanding what that spread position is and how you might interpret it at home. And so we don't really need to shuffle too much for that. So we're going to have 8 cards total, of course. All right, so we'll start with fire. I think it's helpful to flip both of the same element over at the same time because we do want to look at comparisons. We want to be able to play off of these two and understand their relationship because these are really two sides of the same coin. And so they should be read together, at least in my opinion. Of course, feel free to take whatever liberties you want to and perform this reading in whatever way you wish. But as far as I conduct it, that's how I like to do it. And so we have the Eight of Fire, or the Eight of Wands, volcano here. And then on the flip side, on the undignified side, we have the Two of Fire, flame. And so we do have two fire element cards coming up in the fire suit. So I think that this is a reading where you really want to dig into those elemental correspondences. So we have flames in a fire category. So it matches pretty well. It's not like we're working, say, with like water or earth where we want to, I don't know, where that might shift how something is exemplified. So we really have fire almost purified or untainted. There's not this sort of lens of another element clouding what that would be. So that's something you might want to take into consideration. When we see the 8, we think of swiftness. We think of almost like a volatility to some extent. But because, of course, it's in that dignified aspect, we're seeing maybe an onset. So somebody who's really good at starting projects, at moving things along, doing things in a swift manner, really getting up and going. So momentum. There's no problem with inertia when it's well dignified. And then when we see the 2 in the ill-dignified, I like to think of that as maybe pertaining to power, to roadblocks. So this would be almost, I view this as almost like the issue of inertia, of having so much force and so much power and speed and ability and kinetic energy when it's dignified, and having this sort of obstinance, this blockage of really untapped power that almost seems like it wants to explode when somebody is in their ill-dignified aspect. So it's interesting to look at that interplay. Moving right along, now we're looking at water. If we're thinking about this in terms of, say, how the Golden Dawn breaks down elements as sort of these realms of being, we start with fire. It's very much connected to that spirit, which is why we delve into that first. Water comes second as that emotional sphere, almost like the yeah, basically it is the yin to the yang, in a way, in a sense. And then, of course, we move into air, which, according to, say, that tradition, we see the combination of fire and water creating air. And then earth is actually really its own element, something that comes on much later. It's much denser, it's imperfect, it's descended. And so it comes at the end. That's just how I went about going through this, but whatever order the elements work in for you, how you see their progression, is how maybe you might want to go about ordering the aces, so to speak. So next we have water, or the ace, quote unquote, of cups. And so we have the sun card here, awareness. So I think that this would be somebody who's very emotionally in tune, somebody who is making good decisions, who there is really no blockage going on there. And then it's funny, we have 2 majors. So another thing to take into consideration, we have 2 majors making up one category. So there's a lot of strength. Neither I would say there isn't more or less strength allocated to the dignified or ill-dignified, but water in that realm is going to be a really strong one for somebody who, say, got these 2 cards in a reading. So that would be maybe an area that they're particularly adept in, or one that they tend to use in life. And so we, of course, have the sun, which is really nice to have in that dignified aspect. Happy, I'd say the sun is one of the more simple but pleasant cards to get, and so there really isn't a lot of complexity, but that's part of the beauty of it. And next we have the High Priestess in that ill-dignified aspect, so mysterious, undercover in a way, kind of that royal in toil and buried feelings. I would see maybe like shadow or unconscious things, potentially trauma that arises when the emotions are ill-dignified and how that's expressed. I really like the majors in this deck specifically. I'll just point that out because we do get a bit of a quote. And so The sun, for example, says, "Come forward to me and establish great ones. Among the small, come forward to childhood." And for the High Priestess, we have, I guess we'll start on the left like we did on the other one. "I am shame and I am boldness. I am shameless and I am ashamed." This deck's just really beautiful. So moving on to air, or the swords, we have the moon. And we have justice. Okay. And it's funny to see how we go from the sun to the moon and air. So again, a very strong suit. We have two majors again. And the moon being a little bit more ambiguous, a little bit deeper and harder to kind of wrap our heads around in a suit. Literally talking about wrapping our heads around things, because it is the intellect, it's the mind, it's that area that we're looking at. And so somebody who's very complex, who's maybe somebody who broods, who has really great ideas that come from a place deep inside of them. So they're able to reflect. I would almost say that this is what a way of integrating the emotion into the intellect and it kind of providing that power. And so it, to me, feels like a carryover from us looking at water or the cups as far as that ace goes. And when we come down to law or justice. So here I would see maybe somebody who is extremely critical, self-critical, picks things apart, picks themselves apart. Their principles kind of become their downfall. When air is ill-dignified, we would want to look at things like that. But this is also, of course, this presides over Libra, or Libra rules, or is correlated to justice. And so it is really an air element within an air suit. And so this is one that's going to be really particularly raw, I would say. And so then moving over finally into that earth suit, what does that domain look like as manifest through a human, or this potential human? So we didn't shuffle too much, so it does appear that we have a lot of majors, although the deck was well shuffled before this, so I am a bit surprised that there are so many majors. But we have the star, and then we have the Fool for the ill-dignified aspect. And so for this, we really want to think about things like, for example, this is the earthly suit. Maybe they are adept in healing. Are they a doctor, a nurse? Are they somebody who is there for their friends? Are they somebody who likes to partake in things that are soothing? Are they very well and deeply connected to nature? Because we're looking at that earth suit, and when it's well dignified as expressed through them. So this is really about, where do they draw their power from when they are exemplifying or using or drawing upon the earth and that suit, that element. And we have the star, and the star is, of course, we know, very healing. It's inspirational, it's renewing. And so they might be somebody who needs to turn to nature, or needs to turn to the physical world and their connections there to find healing and to instill healing in others and for others. So that might be a big role that they play in life, or part of their purpose. When it's ill-dignified, we have the Fools. So maybe decisions that aren't so well thought through, childishness, naivety, acting out, maybe spending or interacting with the material world in a way that is a bit underhanded or undermined, that isn't so mature or well-reasoned, and things like that. And so that's something to keep in mind. So we really want to see how these would manifest. This is assessing our aces in a practical way. We want to understand how they're affecting us. So of course, maybe we're a force to be reckoned with, somebody who is hot and heated, and there's that really fast initial offset in, say, our dignified fire aspect. So when we feel passionate about something, we don't want somebody to tell us to stop and consider the details, or stop and wait and think things through. We want somebody who's going to give us the go-ahead. We want an environment that's conducive for the fast pace that we feel the need to function at. And we're feeling hot-headed, and it's not such a pleasant way. We need release. This is, for me, power that hasn't really found an outlet or a plan. There's no direction per se. And so we need to find and be aware of the fact that release of that is something that's important, so that it doesn't fester, we don't implode or self-destruct. So really deconstruct this as far as how each element is going to be personified by you. So it's a give and take, a wax and wane, and I think that that's part of the beauty of it. And so I hope that was helpful if you choose to perform this reading. If you want, I have this up on my Instagram. Feel free to head over there. I'm usually posting spreads somewhat often, and I'll post a bunch of random stuff, but I have all of my spreads up there. And but you can always just screenshot this. And my Instagram is always linked down below, by the way. So that's that. And then I thought we would quickly go into what I got for this and how I interpreted it. So I'll set up the cards how they were for me, and I'll be right back, and we can look at that if that's something you're at all interested in. All right, everybody, I'm back. So we are here with basically my results, and so I'm going to take you through how, not necessarily like step by step how I interpreted it, but just a taste of, say, how I recorded my reading and how I go about, say, recording readings. Potentially it's different every time. I would say this one I just did a short little blurb for each card. I kept it pretty vague. It was almost like telling a story. I felt like it almost turned out like a horoscope, or each one felt like a sun sign horoscope in the way it was written, at least. And so I felt okay sharing that. One of the big things that I noticed was that there was definitely a lack of cups or water element going on here. There really wasn't any of that. We have a good mix of fire, earth, and air. Air really being personified through some of the majors, with the magician and the lovers here up at the top. Yeah, so those are more air oriented majors, but we really didn't get anything related to water, and that was pretty interesting to look at. So this is how I went about interpreting it. This is just how I went. So the sun and the moon is how I said, or at least showcased the positive versus the ill dignified. Not necessarily how it needs to be done, but I just used those little symbols and then used the glyphs for the elements, and then wrote them in like that. And then I just wrote a short little blurb for each one. I guess I'll share maybe a few. I think that they got better actually at the end as I started to get into the, yeah, you can see, so the blurbs continued. And let's see. So for water being on the flip side here, with the 5 of Pentacles, I wrote, when water turns rancid, I am unstable, I neglect myself and turn away, help offered to me. I wallow and am emotionally and physically self-destructive. I worry and wither. So something to that effect. And I also think that the imagery lends itself. We're looking, of course, at that 5 of Pentacles. I didn't take the time to go so in depth. I think this is one you can return to. So for example, I laid this reading out as it happened for me, and maybe on the day that it happened, I wasn't really looking to write extensively about each card position, but I can always come back to it and see how maybe it's playing out now that I have these things in mind. So I can always do like a assessing my aces revisited, and then really just use the same cards. And if I feel like I have new insights and more that I want to say, especially in specifics on how these are really speaking and coming through in my actions, then I can always return back to this and maybe just do a new entry. But let's see, what else do we have? So I thought that this one actually I wrote a bit more, and it had to do with the air element. So this is where we got the 7 of Wands in relation to the ill-dignified way that I might express the air element. And so we have, when I exemplify, stale and stagnant air become defensive, all dialogue is an attack, and, well, I apologize for grammar, and I retaliate against all perceived threats. My mind is distorted and single-veined. I believe the world to be against me. I have a small-minded perspective and expend mental energy on fruitless avenues. So this is really about me shutting down mentally, about feeling defensive and isolated when that's not the case, the way that I react to stimuli when I'm within that, and the way that really nothing seems to work out, and it's because I simply won't let it. My mind is not in the right state to really allow anything to work. So it's really about just letting it rest, taking time by myself, not embarking on anything new, and maybe taking a retreat from social aspects just because they aren't clearly helping me during that time. It's just really a heated state, and outward or outside voices are not really welcome. And so that's something that's good for me to keep in mind. Let's see if there's anything else that's helpful. What else? I think I liked, which one was an okay one? Okay, so fire as ill-dignified with the Six of Pentacles or Six of Earth here. And I just wrote, when fire becomes frustration or stifled force, I become selfish and turn in. I am not of service to myself or others, and outward expression dwindles. So I'm aware that when I'm not feeling impassioned, that I'm not really in a place to give to anybody, that I can't be of service to myself or others. Instead, I really need to take the time. I almost view this as Demeter when Persephone has to descend back into the underworld to be with Hades. So she doesn't have that energy. There is no zeal and zest, and so the world kind of goes into a dormant state during that time. This imagery also lends itself really well to that interpretation. And so that's kind of how I viewed myself when I'm not feeling that passion, when I don't feel a spark inside of me. There's no use in me trying to be of service to others because my wellspring is dry. I know that I draw heavily from that fire element, and when it's not there, I don't have anything to give in terms of materiality or physical resources to help and lend a hand. And so that's just a taste of how mine went for me and how I went about, say, recording it. And I do think that this is one that I would revisit and say maybe I had an experience where I felt like I didn't have a lot of passion that day and I wasn't able to give. How did I go about fixing that? How did I recharge myself and find and reinvigorate that passion? And then I might return to and might do like a little journal entry with assessing my aces revisited. I might write that key example and how I went about, say, solving that problem or pushing past this ill-dignified aspect of fire and its exemplification through me. So I hope that that helps as far as a little bit more of a practical approach and how, say, somebody like me would go about working with this spread long term. And so I hope that this was helpful for you guys. If you try it, I'd love to know. And I hope you are all doing well. Until next time, bye everyone.